Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. So let's go. The font is funny, but anyway. I will be looking at evaluation and monitoring, and specifically how this can be used as a tool to document and understand cultural participation and community inclusion. But very quickly, let me just show you where we are. We're over there, very southern tip of the Mediterranean, very tiny island. This is Malta, the Maltese Islands, Malta and Gozo, with a population of, in total, the whole country, 450,000, 316 square kilometers, so we're extremely small. And Valletta 2018 includes the whole of the Maltese Islands. And this is Valletta, the capital city. It is a peninsula surrounded by the Grand Harbour and the Marsamxett Harbour. So we look at it as Valletta, but also as the wider context, we sometimes refer to it as Greater Valletta. The population of Valletta as the capital in itself is of just around 7,000 people. So this is just to give you a bit the context of how really small we are. And we're an island which is very dependent and has a strong focus on tourism. We get around 2 million tourists a year. Last year we got 2.3 million tourists. Tourism makes part of 12% of our gross domestic product. And around 9% of the total tourists arriving in Malta decide to stay somewhere around Valletta or the surrounding area. Around 92 to 93% of the total tourists visiting Malta pay a visit to Valletta at some point. And last year, in 2017, 36% of all the tourists assessed, obviously, in our research, traveling to Malta, were aware of Valletta 2018 before actually coming over. And this is our cultural program. So just very quickly, so I can put you a bit in the context of what Valletta 2018 is all about. Our team is an island-wide festa, the feast. And we chose the theme of the festa specifically to represent the celebration, the gathering, the people coming together to celebrate something that they share as a common belief, as a common way of celebration, as something which puts them together as a community, no matter what the community is and what the backgrounds are. Festa is also a celebration in terms of sound, noise, smells as well. The festa is religious, as we perceive it, but it's also, and most importantly, something which is very communal, which is something very much about the community spirit. And we have 3 themes making up our program. Island stories, so our life on an island, on a very small island, where everyone knows each other and where everyone knows everything about each other, being surrounded by the sea and the importance and dependency on the sea. Future Baroque, so looking at the extravagance, the theatricality, the color, and all the noise of the city, and Voyages. Voyages looks more about intercultural dialogue, about geography, about Valletta and Malta being a melting pot of cultures throughout its history and in the present and in the future. And this is the criteria for which we how we basically chose our program. It is also a guiding principle in terms of how we are looking at our evaluation. So obviously the quality, the legacy, the social engagement, and the European and obviously international dimension. Since the very start of the process, since 2011, I've been on board with the foundation since then, so it's 7 long years of my life. And I am actually from Valletta itself, so I've really seen the whole process sort of coming together, but I've also really seen and witnessed Valletta changing completely. Valletta 7-8 years ago was a city which needed badly regeneration, which was totally empty in the evening, with very basic accommodation facilities. People did not want to live in Valletta. I grew up with that certain sense of telling people I am from Valletta, and they used to look at me a bit like, And now it's the complete opposite. Now people come to Valeta to entertain themselves for cultural purposes. They enjoy spending time in Valeta. The city has been regenerated. Spaces which were just in the center of the city where car parks are now public open spaces. There's pedestrianization, a lot of tourist accommodation now. I'm not saying that everything happened because of the capital of culture or that every change is positive. Obviously, Valeta 2018 was a strong sort of push in order to improve the city at a time where it needed much change. And obviously there is also the negative connotations of this change, because whilst outsiders, people not from Valeta, now want to come and live in the city, are buying property to transform it into tourist accommodation, the same people who were raised in Valeta feel forced out because of the changing property prices. So there is obviously there is this balance of change, but also keeping in mind sort of the local context. But definitely Valeta has changed, and I think overall it did change quite for the better, to be honest, wearing my Valeta resident hat. Culture infrastructure projects, this is one of our projects. It's the Valeta market, which opened earlier this year. It's a food market with space on the upper side for cultural activities. We have 4 culture infrastructure projects, another one being Straight Street, so the regeneration of what used to be in the 50s and in the 60s red light district, which is now an entertainment and cultural hub with a dedicated culture program. And we have another 2 projects, which are, one of them is the new Museum of Art, new National Museum of Art called Musa, with a community curation approach, which is due to open in about 2 months' time. And another one, the final one, is the Valeta Design Cluster, which most probably will not be finished by this year, but will open in 2019. The Valeta Design Cluster is aimed at creating a design hub into a residential and community area of Valeta. It's aimed to bring into the design activity, but also to create that sense of regeneration and involvement of the local community as part of the development of this project. Besides being a changing city, we've also witnessed a changing cultural sector. So at the time of writing the bids for Valeta as a capital of culture, the first ever cultural policy was drafted. What was then Arts Council, what is now the Arts Council, was restructured. We've had research starting off looking at the importance of the creative economy and the impacts generated, and also a strategy through Arts Council, which looks at 2020, so 2018 being just a sort of a part of the process and not sort of the end of it, of course. We've also had a lot of training schemes and capacity building projects and programs for artists and cultural practitioners, funding schemes launched, tax benefits, with an aim to, as much as possible, try and professionalize the sector, going from being a part-time artist to a full-time recognized artist or cultural practitioner. And we've also tried to take culture and projects outside of Valeta, so within the local communities, going to the local communities rather than asking them to come over to Valeta, no matter how small we are, to attend or participate in a cultural activity. Okay, so research. 3 main areas of research: evaluation and monitoring. I'm coming to that. Our annual conference, which looks at focusing on cities, communities, and spaces, and this year, obviously, at our legacy. And cultural mapping. Cultural mapping is a project which included the mapping of various cultural spaces, including theatres. We have a theatres audit which has mapped around, believe it or not, in a small island like Malta, 96 theatres in Malta and Gozo. So it's basically auditing and making the information freely accessible about the infrastructure that we have available. But this is our evaluation and monitoring model. Our evaluation and monitoring process started in 2015, and we've been carrying out and publishing research on an annual basis. It is coordinated by the foundation. We do not do the research, we do not evaluate ourselves, of course, because well, there would be a bit of a bias in that. We have a scientific committee, 5 independently appointed researchers who carry out qualitative studies, together with members, I'm really sorry for the font, I don't know what happened, together with members of public institutions, National Statistics Office, the Malta Tourism Authority, Jobs Plus, responsible for employment, and Economic and Policy Department, which looks obviously at economic impact. We're a team working together, and we coordinate the research carried out by this group. So it's quantitative and qualitative research. Why are we doing this? Originally, obviously, the scope to start so early in the day was to feed into our cultural program, in the formulation of our cultural program. We obviously also recognize the need to document and assess such an important project. This is the first ever time in which such an important cultural project of this scale and nature takes place in Malta. So we obviously need to take record of what is happening and what is generating in the sector. How is this affecting the sector? And we obviously wanted to document the change in the culture and the creative sector, but also the change in Valeta, the change affecting the community and the surrounding areas. How is this affecting cultural participation, and in what way? As a way also to plan and have data and have information in hand to be able to move forward after 2018, very importantly. Our model, we started off from the ECOC policy framework, research framework, and we obviously adapted it to our own local needs and circumstances. We have 5 research teams. The first one looks at cultural participation and European identity, and our cultural program, of course. The second one looks at governance and finance, so the impact on the sector, on the economy, on employment in the culture and the creative sector. The third one is community inclusion and space, so the impact on the community, how accessible is our program, the impact on the surrounding areas where our cultural infrastructure projects are taking place. Tourist experience, so the impact on the tourism industry, and the last one is the Valeta brand. So how are our branding strategies working or not? So very quickly, a few of our studies and what are the main results. I chose specifically those which affect cultural participation or community involvement. All of these are a mixture of quantitative and qualitative studies. This is a qualitative study conducted by one of our researchers, and it looks at assessing our cultural program from an organizational point of view. So whether our projects are meeting their objectives and how these are being met, assessing audience participation and engagement. This study was also very important in understanding, back 2-3 years ago, our lack of European dimension within our project. And it was also as a result of this analysis that we then obviously took action to try as much as possible and involve and have a strong European dimension, given that obviously this is a European Capital of Culture project. And also how to include grassroots project into the context of an international large-scale event. This is a quantitative study, Valeta Participation Survey. It looks at assessing participation in events taking place and projects taking place in Valeta. Some quick stats: 71.4% were aware of the ECOC title last year in 2017. This is 2017 data. 4.4% of the people interviewed out of a scale of 5 felt that Valeta is changing for the better. And since 2014 to 2017, there was a 3% increase in live theatre performance participation. The Culture Participation Survey, on the other hand, is a quantitative study which looks at the nationwide assessment on culture and cultural participation. In 2016, the study was carried out in 2016, 91% of the population participated in some kind of cultural activity, where we define, well, we do not really define culture, we leave it open as much as possible. 67% attended a parish festa, 37% were active in a variety of cultural activities, And I feel this is quite an important figure. 32% stated specifically that culture is an essential part in their life. And with regards to, this is the last thing about cultural participation that I'm presenting, we're also carrying out an audience profiling exercise. So we've chosen most of our projects taking place this year and events, and we are collecting data from participants at these events, demographics, the reasons for them to attend, what other strands they're participating in. So if they're present at a music event, what other type of events they're interested, and other interests, what they're doing before, after the event, how and why did they choose to attend this event. The idea is to trace a profile of people participating in our events, to have in hand and to disseminate within the cultural sector after 2018. Very quickly, just some quick data from our community evaluation. These two studies I'm presenting are qualitative analysis. The first one is community inclusion and accessibility in Valeta 2018. And I think the main outcome is that physical accessibility in Valeta, respondents stated that physical accessibility in Valeta improved, but is still of concern. I must stress that Valeta is a walled city, it's a peninsula, so there is also a limit, unfortunately, as to how much we can improve accessibility because of the natural topography of the city. But there is sort of this belief that physical accessibility has improved within the city walls. They believe that the capital of culture brought increased economic activity. There is still a concern on livability, as I was saying. The people interviewed, the people who are somehow linked with Valeta, believe that Valeta is changing for the better, it's more accessible. They feel and recognize how nice it is that people want to come in Valeta, but there is also concern in terms of livability, as in being able for them to stay and live in Valeta. And there is also this notion on dilemma between Valeta as home, so Valeta being this intimate place, versus Valeta being the capital, being the administrative center, being the cultural and entertainment hub. And another study is the one looking at the impact on the impact on cultural infrastructure. So basically, we're looking at our 4 projects and how they have different objectives depending on who is actually implementing them and their targets. So we have projects which look more at attracting the community, others with a more artistic focus, and others which are also on a more of a business-related aspect, like the market. We have noted a rise in planning applications since we were awarded the title in Valeta and in the areas around the cultural infrastructure spaces, and we are using also as part of the study a PPGIS workshop, so a public participatory geographic information system tool through Mapping for Change and UCL London, whereby we are looking at understanding the different meanings the areas have for different stakeholders involved. Just very quickly, this is AltoFest. It is an example that I would like to give in terms of how one of our projects is being evaluated. AltoFest is a festival which takes place annually since 2011 in Naples, and for the first time AltoFest came out of Naples, and we had a 4-week program of events during the last month. And the project involves basically the artists, it involves the participants, but it involves also space donors. So artists, they reside in private homes and work on a performance during this residency space for 2 weeks, and then local participants are invited to attend, to participate in the performance within this home. So there is this notion of taking an artistic event into a very intimate space as one's own home, and inviting the surrounding community to participate and be part of this event. Lessons learned and the challenges and the struggles. From a very research perspective, I would say that the main struggle that we faced was getting the message across on how important research and evaluation is, and how much of a tool, how much of an important tool this can be, and how this can be used, basically. We faced the struggle internally, we faced the struggle within the wider sector, but I think now that the results are coming in, sort of, we have the data in hand, it's looking a bit clearer as how much important it is to have this tool in hand. So I would recommend other capitals of culture. I know that Kaunas are also planning, you're also planning this, to as much as possible select at least the very basic studies to be evaluated. We've also had our struggles in terms of coordination with other stakeholders. So in our case, we didn't really manage to get our University of Malta on board officially. And that is why we chose to opt for selecting 5 independently selected researchers. Having university on board officially would have meant that continuing the evaluation after 2018 would have been a much easier task. We're planning to do so. We're planning to continue this in the medium and hopefully in the long term, but definitely having university as a main stakeholder would have been much easier. We can skip. So, 2 of our main events, which I wanted to highlight: Valeta Pageant of the Seas on the 7th of June, for anyone who's interested, with the magical backdrop of the Grand Harbour, and our annual conference on the 24th and 26th October, where we will be sharing our legacy, but discussing legacy with a number of workshops throughout these 3 days. So I hope to see you at some point in Valeta. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite